Welcome to the Hiki-Goma podcast. I'm Elliot. This is a podcast about my various experiences making manga. I want to continue the sort of irregular format of this show and going off the rails slightly by talking about theme. This is probably like jumping ahead in terms of pre-production stuff, but I guess I can probably like talk about it at any time, so I guess it's fine here. I want to talk about this because it relates to something I'm currently dealing with in my series, Aegis. This is basically a continuation of what I talked about in the previous episode. Basically, I was going through a period of doing less work than I wanted to. It was just sort of a difficult patch of the story process itself, just kind of difficult, arduous, hard decisions. That stuff is mostly over. Currently, I am writing a scene that I have only relatively recently basically inserted in the opening of this manga series. This is a series that I had written, pretty detailed script for that has, multiple versions, and only after some time away from it and coming back and doing a proofread again and taking some more notes, I realized, oh wow, I really need to move this scene that's at the very end of this. This needs to be like the third scene that happens, and furthermore, it needs to be very different. Actually, it needs to be so different that I'm going to have to rewrite that entire scene. It's effectively the same kind of scene, but it has to play out in a totally different way than it previously did, in a much better way, basically. And the reason I want to talk about theme, and I guess what I'd say, like my perspective on theme is that theme is currently serving me as a kind of, North Star, a kind of guiding principle, a kind of keystone going forward into writing a scene that's quite difficult, quite important in terms of the story. It really sets up the premise. It sets up a lot of the character motivations. It's a scene that a lot of characters will likely refer back to over the course of the story as like an integral moment. Will often, it's important, basically. It's critical. And so how do you not screw that up? How do you actually know how to execute that correctly? Well, theme, among other things, is, I think, the way you go about that. I would also describe theme as being like a cipher, or like a, a cipher, I guess. If a cipher is the thing that, like solves, encrypted things or whatever. It's a thing where you can go into a scene and you're asking yourself, okay, what is the thing I do here? How do I approach this? What sort of tone should this have? Theme is not the only thing that's going to do that, but it is a pretty critical thing, and it's kind of the meta keystone, I guess you'd call it. It's kind of the keystone, the kind of guiding principle above all other guiding principles. I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself in terms of what are my definitions of theme? What the fuck am I actually talking about? I'll say at the outset that theme is difficult to grasp, and it's something that, in kind of the spirit of this show really being just me talking about my experiences, I want to make it clear that, like, I feel like I don't fully at all know what I'm talking about with this. I feel like the more that I, learn about this kind of thing, particularly theme, the more that I'm like, oh wow, this is really foreign to me, actually, and that it's actually a lot stranger than I thought it would be. It's a lot more multifaceted than I thought it would be. The method of creating it is very odd. Theme, the way that it emerges in a story, also very odd. I guess theme is probably a blanket term for a whole number of different things, I might end up going into more detail about later. That, I don't want to imply that I have some, like, super detailed taxonomy in my mind about this kind of thing, because I really don't. I want to basically provide my perspective on theme, especially because I probably have a reasonably specific idea of this, and as I go on making more of these episodes of this podcast, I'm probably going to be talking about theme a fair bit, so I kind of want to just be able to, like, define what I'm talking about really, like, at the start before I go on too much longer, because otherwise people are going to be confused that, they might be thinking of their version of theme and not my version of theme or whatever. But the reason theme is so difficult, and probably why there are so many different ideas of what themes are, and people will say, for instance, oh yeah, the theme of that movie is war, and it's like, personally, right, like, I don't think that is a good description of what a theme is. I think that's like subject matter, perhaps, or the theme of that film is that, this thing is bad. It's like, well, again, that's not really a theme. That's more like a message, right? And so you can see, like, these are all related, but they're not exactly the right thing, I don't think, or they're not specific enough, or they don't really get to the heart of what's really important. And I think it's possible that probably puts a lot of people off. Like, they think themes are just things that are like in English class or something, or they think that themes mean symbolism. They think that themes are like, oh, the author, the curtains are blue, and did the author write that? No, that's just some bullshit my English teacher came up with, or whatever. That's all that themes are. Fuck it. Themes are shit. And the reason it's so hard is because theme is the most, probably, as far as I can tell, the most abstract aspect of storytelling and writing, right? The reason it's so hard to pin down is because it is, I'm not sure what you would call it, like it's an emergent property of other tangible things in the story. Like, we can't see theme directly in the way that we can see characters directly, right? We can see what they look like, we can see how they behave, we can hear their dialogue, we can see their actions, we can see the actual physical events of the plot. But we can't really like see theme. Theme is an emergent property that it emerges above these other things in a kind of hierarchy, right? You can see people, and then you can see a people in a classroom, but you can't really see like a society or a country, right? You can't see that kind of whatever upper taxonomy of beings or whatever, I don't know what you would call it. And so that makes it really hard to perceive, because we can only perceive it through other things. It's sort of like, I don't know, exactly the extent of the science on this, but it's like gravity, right? We can only see the effects of gravity, as opposed to, at least with the naked eye, I don't know what physics can probably, see that somehow, measure gravity somehow and some whatever. But at least with the naked eye, we can only see the effects of gravity by seeing, apples fall from a tree or whatever, people falling over. That's the way that we see, or, celestial bodies or whatever. That's the way that we perceive gravity, only through substantial things. Now, I don't want to get into a whole like philosophical thing about this, but that is an important thing to note, is that you cannot really, in a story sense, directly create theme. And it's a thing that also makes it very, very subjective, because, of course, if it is an emergent property that is only in our brains, basically, it's only a thing that, in a sense, exists within us, outside of the story, then that's obviously going to end up being very open to interpretation. So you end up with this thing that you can't create directly, really. You can have an imagined idea of it that you're almost trying to implant like an architectural structure into the story, and then you're hoping that people presumably perceive what you were going for from what you've created. It's like more intuitive when you're actually doing it, but it is quite complicated, and you can, I guess what you would say is there's not really a fixed perspective on what theme is. Whereas if you ask most people what character is, they'd probably give you a pretty, uniform answer or whatever. Okay, so I should probably use an example of what I think themes are. I'm going to use the film Heat as an example of this. If you have not seen that, then you should definitely watch it. It's a fantastic film. You do not want to be spoiled for this film. The film Heat, I don't know if it's literally the best example of theme ever. It's just the thing that came to my head. I think it's just an easy example to use. So basically, this film exemplifies a good use of theme. It's a theme that does not have a moralizing message to it, right? It's not a film that's saying, this is bad, we should live this way, da-da-da-da-da. It's not a don't look up sort of film, right? Where it's not hitting you over the head with a particular message. It's not even approximating that. Really, the best themes should be what you'd call steel-manned, right? They're really presenting a good argument for any side of the equation, and or they're not really arguing for anything. They're just demonstrating different approaches to a situation. Some films might be like an ideological struggle. To, use a really lame example, the X-Men films are all about something to do with mutants. The Magneto wants something or other, and Charles thinks that mutants are okay, and Magneto is like some kind of mutant supremacist, and and it ends up being that some people think Magneto's right about everything, and some people think that Charles is right about everything. Fans of the series, right? There's at least some. I'm not going to argue that that's like literally the best, ideological writing ever, but that's just an example of you can have however many, there are probably like about 15 of those films. You can have that many of those films, and a lot of them are dealing with that same kind of theme. Basically, how do we deal with this dangerous, whatever that's an other, and they're a minority, and, You've got real life parallels to racism and things like that. You've got 15 films, and it's not as if that problem is like solved in the context of those films. It's sort of a perpetual thing. You almost, I think, want to deal with these like perpetual problems that are not exactly solvable. And so Heat is not exactly so thoroughly in the realm of an ideological dispute. But I guess if I were to summarize it, it's basically about how people deal with attachment. Basically romantic attachment, especially in the face of, I guess it's specifically in the form of work, but it's really to do with like a kind of, particularly like a male like obsession, I think. You have the De Niro character and the Al Pacino character. They're basically, direct parallels. There's a scene in the middle of the film that pretty clearly outlines that, where they both meet up in a bar. One's a bank robber, one's a detective. They're both playing a kind of cat and mouse game with each other. And I think Al Pacino says, I feel like, we could have been friends. Basically, we're really the same kind of person. They're both people who are effectively obsessed with their work to the point of it kind of eliminating other aspects of their life, or to the degree where they have kind of unconventional opinions on attachment, or they don't really have normal human relations. De Niro's character kind of famously has this line, which kind of plays into the title of the film, which is like, if, I feel the heat coming around the corner, if I feel like the cops are onto me because I'm a bank robber, then, I can drop everything in my life in 30 seconds. I can just walk out and never turn back. And so the film basically challenges him on that by, putting him in a relationship with this woman he comes to love, and then questioning at, the end of the film, can he live up to that creed, basically, that kind of, almost Bushido-esque kind of creed. Can he remain unattached? Can he have this kind of like Buddhist, just wipe everything and, not be bothered, and just kind of live as some kind of weird free spirit outside the law kind of person? And ultimately he can't. But it's not as if, of course, the film is saying, aha, look, criminals, they can't stick by their word. There's obviously no moralizing about it. It's just a perspective. It's just a choice his character makes. And that choice is interesting. It'd be interesting if he chose to actually leave the criminal life, as he attempts to do with his kind of new girlfriend or whatever. But a point I want to make about the film is that film is a fantastic example of theme, because the theme is basically integrated into the entire work. Most of the characters in the film, the prominent ones at least, are dealing with that similar issue. Pacino is obsessed with his work. He's on his third marriage that's really not going super well, and it's sexless and kind of emotionless, and he's having problems with his daughter, and and similarly, you have this Val Kilmer character, who's also a bank robber, of course, with Robert De Niro, and he makes sort of the quote-unquote like correct choice at the end of the film, and he leaves his wife. Basically, she kind of gives him a no-go signal, like, the police are onto us, you've got to get out of here, and he just leaves her. And it's horrible and bittersweet, but, he also doesn't go to prison, so he sort of wins, or he sort of lives by that kind of code, I guess. And again, that's interesting. And so that film does not moralize. It just presents this thing that's real, and it exists, right? It's really possibly an unsolvable dilemma. These people have this thing that they're obsessed with, and it gives them, real purpose in life, but they take it home and it really destroys their home life. But they also need that human attachment to some degree, but the people they're with, they're constantly hurting. And, it's obviously like a complicated issue, and you just see the way that people deal with that. And if I'm describing this right, that sounds like a very, almost like a small drama. But of course, that is all couched within this excellent action heist film with some of the, greatest, action scenes that have been put to film, right? So it really just goes to show, like, you can have these quite emotionally grounded themes that are kind of couched within something that could ostensibly not have that at all. There are lots of heist films that, never ever achieve the depth that something like Heat does. And that's what's like so impressive about it as a film. It really, really elevates it, above what it potentially could have been. Now, I want to make that point actually extra clear, is that the themes, again, are like gravity. They really are showing us this kind of meta structure for the characters. They're allowing us to see the characters not just as people, but as part of a tapestry, right? As part of a web that's sort of interlinking. And so they're not just characters; they're more than that. They're kind of they're kind of pawns in a game, or they're part of a kind of greater structure, a kind of constellation, or whatever. And so, ostensibly, the film could work without having the themes it does, right? It could potentially only be De Niro's character who deals with this problem or whatever with his professional life and his love life. And it could be that, Al Pacino's character and the Val Kilmer character, maybe they don't have wives, or they have perfectly fine relationships, or, they're not obsessive, or they're not dealing with this same thing. They could just be, blank to the theme, and it would probably still work as a film. It would probably still be a good film. It would still be shot very well. It would still have great music. It would still make sense. It would, the character motivations would make sense, but it would be lacking that kind of next step that would make it brilliant, I guess. And so I feel like that's always what's fascinated me, is that all of the films that I like, all of what I think are the best films, works of literature that I've ever seen or read, they all have that strong thematic undercurrent or overcurrent, overtone, whatever. They have some kind of thematic structure that is really kind of binding them together, like gravity, creating a planet or something, Basically, to put it simply, it's demonstrating, okay, there's this problem, here's how different people deal with it, and that's couched within whatever narrative you want. Now, the reason I'm mentioning theme is because I'm currently writing a scene that is, it's quite a tricky scene to write because it's quite important. It requires me to be very accurate about setting up certain events. I have to be quite certain about that they're actually going to have good payoffs. I have to be, pretty careful that I'm not setting up things that I actually can't pay off or that I'm not certain about. And furthermore, it's just important emotionally for the character. We really have to buy, certain motivations for the main character, going forward for the rest of the story. It's pretty crucial as a scene. It's still difficult to do, for sure. Writing anything from scratch, especially to input it into the middle of a story in such a way that I'll probably have to update later scenes to kind of make this one fit, basically. But the reason it's a lot easier than it potentially could be for other people, or for other people who've written in a different way, is that I have theme, especially, as this guiding light, basically, of, okay, what is this story about? I know what this story is about. I've determined by this odd kind of dialectical process of creating a theme, writing some stuff, seeing a sort of actually different pattern to what I previously perceived emerging from those characters. Okay, now I've got theme version 2. Oh, now I'm going to rewrite those characters in the image of that second theme. Okay, now actually a slightly new version is emerging. Okay, now here comes theme version 3, and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not thinking of it consciously like, yes, this is the third version, but over time, there's a kind of action reaction kind of thing. And so because I've been through that process where my theme, right, has gone through many, many, many iterations, countless. It's hard to say. It's not like, oh, it's been through 10. It's been through like a million, subtle permutations is probably a better word. It's been through many, many, many subtle permutations. And now it's not finished. I have sort of an intuition, I suppose, that it's closer to the top of, it's closer to an absolute point where it becomes, there's almost diminishing returns in terms of making it clearer, I suppose. I don't want to be too cocky with that, because I haven't written a huge amount yet, so it could be that it actually I'm really far off. But at least to me, it seems like, okay, I've been through a lot of iterations. It's probably more certainly in this direction than my first couple of versions. The first couple of versions are probably always gonna probably suck, to be clear. And so because I have that theme, every line of dialogue, every action of the characters, I know that I'm making a choice that is aligned with every other choice I'm basically making in the story. Like I said, it's like a cipher, right? You know, you have this keyword, or you have this goal, this North Star, this guiding light, you know, in a sort of traveling by boat analogy. And I'm looking at the story, right? I update my theme. I go, actually, the theme, it needs to be a bit more specifically like, it's more like this, isn't it? It's a bit more like this updated version. That seems to be the message I'm getting from this new stuff I've written. Oh, I've written some new stuff. Actually, that's actually really what the theme is. That this has really shown me the characters really have this kind of relationship with each other, I've discovered after writing. Or these characters, you know, really it actually seems like they're dealing with this slightly more specific issue than, you know, whatever. And then I can go back over the entire work, I can reread it and go, well, now that I have this new idea of the theme, and I'm looking back at this old stuff, that doesn't really reflect that anymore. So I've kind of got to bring it up to this new level. And so that's sort of effectively what I've done with various drafts. That's basically what drafting is effectively sculpting something down into a more and more singular vision, basically, of, okay, this is what this is. I forget who said this, famous sculptor, but they said, like, you know, how do you carve a sculpture? You take a block of marble and you carve away everything that isn't, you know, David or whatever, you know. And so that's basically what it is. But you have to know what David is to be able to do that, right? You actually have to have a selection category. You have to have a specificity to be able to carve away everything that isn't that thing. To make that example less esoteric, you know, if I am struggling between, is this a comedy? Is this a little darker? Is this more of a drama? And then I pick, this is a comedy, that's my guiding light, let's say. Comedy. Extremely basic example, obviously. But let's say, you know, you get a note from an editor, or you get a note from tons of people, cut out the dark stuff, it's really bad. The comedy is really where it's at. Okay, comedy, that's my new guiding light. When you read back through the script, it's very easy suddenly to go, okay, red marker, you know, drama, X out all of that stuff, right? That's a selectivity model. And so on a much, much subtler, more intuitive level, that's what theme is like as a guiding light. I'll have to talk in more detail about how I think I would go about making a theme or coming up with a theme in a later episode, just because it's going to take a really long time to explain. Also because the way I went about doing theme, while it has eventually, through an extremely long, circuitous route, led me to somewhere that I think is good and I'm happy with, it was really not a great method at all. I wasted a lot of time. It was very bothersome and painful. And I think I have better ideas of how to go about that in the future. If I were just to give an extremely, extremely basic idea of what I personally have attempted to do, you know, in stories I've written post Aegis, post, you know, I spent a long time creating this theme for this one series, Aegis. In the stuff I've written after that, what I've attempted to do is basically the opposite of what I did for Aegis. With Aegis, I basically tried to, in abstract, come up with a theme, then build aspects of the world, but then I just kept on going back to theme. I kept on going back to abstract. I was stuck in the abstract realm. I didn't have enough, you know, pieces, almost chess pieces, characters, plot events, settings. I didn't have enough of those locked in, and I hadn't even attempted writing in order to, you know, really examine potential themes that might emerge from those things. So I'd almost take the inverse approach. Don't do top down. Don't go theme first, abstract first, and then into solid. This is a little confusing, but you basically almost have to go, I think, right? Solid, as in motivation, plot, characters, events, really specific. Ideally in writing, in script, in prose, whatever. In drawing, it doesn't matter, whatever. Tangible and concrete. This is my character. You know, all that stuff's going to change, so it doesn't actually matter if it's shit or whatever. But something concrete. Inherently, from just having that, there are certain more abstract things that emerge from that. You know, like, let's say, for example, if you were writing an early draft of Heat, you might have a cop, you might have, you know, this bank robber character, De Niro, right? And then you might realize after writing that script a bit, oh, this is a good, you know, pretty conventional heist movie. And then you realize, oh, these characters are actually they both must be really obsessive, right? They're quite obsessive people, to live this criminal life that's, very, very exacting and extremely demanding on, like, what kind of person would live this life where they have to drop everything in a, drop of a hat, they, can't be emotionally attached. That's quite odd, isn't it? And you've got this detective character. He seems like he could be like that as well. He's so obsessed with this case, da-da-da. Okay, that's a theme, right? Okay, now you've made this parallel connection, and then you've now created this guiding light, and you can now go back through the whole script, through the whole story, and basically push everything, suck it all in to kind of aim towards it. So everything is turned towards that guiding light in one way or another. It's not as if literally the entire film is about that, but on more of a kind of substrate level, it's all directed around that. It's almost like if you can think about like city planning, right? You see houses, they're lined up, whatever. But on literally an underground level, literally a substrate level, housing is partially done to, the way the houses are laid out is for the larger purpose of, okay, we need roads for cars to go down, and okay, we need, sewerage, and we need water, and we need internet, and all that kind of thing. There are multiple levels of why things are, laid out in the way they are. So obviously, in a broader sense, everything is pointing towards the theme, but it doesn't literally mean that, every single line of dialogue has to be about the theme. This is slightly a weird example, but the video game Deus Ex Human Revolution is kind of a good example of this, where in that game you can, talk to different NPCs around the map or whatever. And, the theme of the game is ostensibly, it's a dumb theme, which I could probably talk about for hours, but it's basically, are cybernetic implants good? The answer is yes, basically, but that's the theme of the game. That's what they've decided. This is the theme of the game. And it's the theme of the game because it's literally all that anyone in the entire world ever talks about, including homeless people who have no cybernetic implants. Like every single character, they're just obsessed. They're literally just obsessed with cybernetic implants. So, and that's bad, of course, because then it doesn't feel like a real world. It just feels like a world of people who are like, it's a big issue in the world, but it's not, life goes on or whatever, So, of course, it doesn't have to be like that extreme, but hopefully that makes sense that, there's an underlying structure that is more clearly pointing towards the theme. And that, of course, goes through multiple kind of dialectical iterations, effectively, where you update the theme becomes more clear, you go back to the work, you centralize the work more around that theme, you come up with some new ideas, synthesis, let's say, in the dialectical system. You have some kind of synthesis. Oh, actually, maybe I could pull this other character in, or maybe there's actually some slightly more nuanced idea of this. Okay, that gets updated. It then gets applied back to the entire work, and so on and so forth. So what I'll say is that I have not... I feel like I haven't entirely successfully been able to create a really solid system like that. I found it a bit difficult to really get it working perfectly, but I feel like that's the direction I'm trying to head in, away from trying to, in abstract, create themes and spend a lot of time there and then get to the writing process and then realize, oh wait, actually, there's a totally different thing that seems to be emerging from these characters that I've created. Actually, this doesn't feel right at all. This isn't really what they're dealing with. This theme I came up with a priori, that's not really what they're dealing with. They're actually dealing with something totally different. And then you just have to go through that whole process again. So you've just wasted a whole bunch of time, basically. I'll probably end up talking about theme at a later date because I could just go on about it forever and ever. And I also do want to some degree, I want to like centralize my thoughts on this a little bit more, because to be honest, it's a pretty like complicated, multi-factored process. And even when I'm saying theme and then I describe heat, that is in no way in capturing the breadth of what can be talked about. That's actually a reasonably specific kind of theme, I guess you would call it. So that's it for now. I'll probably talk about this more at a later date. If you want to check out my manga, I probably release something by the time you're watching this, so I'll have links below. I'm releasing the first chapter of Aegis, actually maybe the first two chapters, I'm not sure, of Aegis for free, so please check those out. Anyway, goodbye.